What's up, Coordination? How you doing? This episode today is going to be a really good one. We are doing it on GitcoinDAO and its governance evolution over the last year or so. I've got Linda Z, a GitcoinDAO steward, Kyle Weiss, the executive director of the Gitcoin Foundation and a Moonshot collective workstream lead, Kris, who does DAO operations at GitcoinDAO, Simona Pop, who does DAO engagement strategy at GitcoinDAO, as guests of this episode. This is not everyone who's involved in GitcoinDAO governance, but it's a sample of them. You can go to gov.gitcoin.co if you want to see all the governance discussions. This is just a tiny sample of why GitcoinDAO was launched. GitcoinDAO governs Gitcoin Grants, which is a funding mechanism for the Ethereum community. GitcoinDAO's mission is to build and fund digital public goods. It does that mostly with quadratic funding and Gitcoin Grants. If you know anything about quadratic funding, you know that it's the optimal way to fund a democratic community of public goods. And it's because every quarter on Gitcoin Grants runs a matching campaign that matches contributions from the crowd. Usually about $5 million are given out every quarter. And one of the really powerful things about quadratic funding is that the matching comes from the number of contributions to each grant on Gitcoin. So you're basically getting rewarded for what do your peers think of your project on Gitcoin Grants. And that's really powerful because a $1 contribution can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars of matching on Gitcoin Grants. And that's powerful, but it's also presenting some governance problems. What do we do about Sybil attacks, people who make up new identities in order to get funds out of the matching pool? How do we even allocate funds to the matching pool in the first place? These are the governance problems that Gitcoin had coming out of its ears in early 2021. And on May 25th, 2021, about a year ago, GitcoinDAO launched to solve those governance problems. So this episode is about how do you build and fund digital public goods, but it's also about how do you govern a project that builds and funds digital public goods. And so this episode is about GitcoinDAO Launch. We're going to cover GitcoinDAO Launch and the past of GitcoinDAO for the last year or so. We're going to cover the present. So what does governance look like at GitcoinDAO today? And what does it look like in the future? And this, the objective of this episode is just basically to daylight to y'all, the listener, to you, Coordination, about how a 300-person DAO does governance in the year 2022, show off Gitcoin's path to decentralization. And keep in mind as you listen to this episode that governance is evolutionary. This is a snapshot in time of what's happening, and the ecosystem is moving fast in this build market. So I think that you can expect that if we do another episode in the year 2023 about governance at GitcoinDAO, you'll see an evolution forward of what's been happening. So without further ado, I will introduce our guests. The first voice you'll hear as we start the episode will be me, followed by Kyle Weiss, Executive Director of the Gitcoin Foundation. Really great episode. I hope that you enjoy it. Without further ado, I give you GitcoinDAO governance.
The Opera crypto browser is the world's first web browser built for the crypto community. With Web3 support and a non-custodial wallet, Opera lets you access DeFi apps quickly and easily. The Opera wallet has buy, sell, and swap features, and of course lets you view your beautiful NFTs, but the browser still lets you use any crypto wallet extension you prefer, giving you the choice and flexibility for the Web3 world. Opera lets you view and manage all of your assets across all the blockchains all at once, and offers seamless multi-chain support between Ethereum, Bitcoin, Polygon, Binance Chain, and other EVMs and layer 2s. But Opera goes even deeper than that. Opera has a built-in homepage for crypto natives with the Opera Crypto Corner, with price charts, news feeds, NFT updates to make sure you are always on top of your game. And it even has Discord and Telegram integrated natively into the browser. That's crazy. Opera is truly building the battle station for the crypto world. Check out Opera both on mobile with Android and iOS apps, and on desktop too. ReFi summer has arrived, and Celo is here for it. Celo is the layer 1 blockchain for the regenerative finance movement. It's fast, planet positive, and built for the real world. Celo has committed towards producing a sustainable future from the very beginning, and is the world's first carbon negative, EVM compatible layer 1 blockchain. Celo has become much more than a technology, a currency, a community, or even just a layer 1. Celo is a movement to create conditions of prosperity for everyone. You can soon engage with all of this via green asset Uniswap pools on Celo, benefiting reforestation and other regenerative products through the Toucan protocol, Moss, and more. ReFi is also about the health of communities, and Resource Network is creating Bankless infrastructure for circular trade and mutual credit networks to benefit small businesses and local economies, all on Celo. Follow along on Twitter to learn more about how Celo is accelerating ReFi summer for a positive impact on people, communities, and the planet. If you're attending ECC, visit the Celo Saloon to learn about what's happening on the front lines of ReFi from industry experts.
Hey everyone, what's up?
Hey.
Hey.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We are here to talk about GitcoinDAO and the evolution of its governance. It's been about a year since GitcoinDAO launched in May of 2021. Kyle, can you tell us about the why and the how of the DAO launch on May 25th, 2021?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us. I think we're excited to kind of tell a little bit more about Gitcoin and how we got to where we are today. So back a year ago, I think we were really interested in solving some of the governance problems that Gitcoin had around our grants program and sort of funding allocation specifically. At the time, we were a team that was trying to figure out, how much money to appropriate to each of the different categories of grants that were on Gitcoin. And we recognized there's this really large opportunity to move not only the platform, the entire grants platform, over to the community and to the DAO and what we aspired to be a DAO at the time, but also the decision making for how to allocate that funding, and to turn more and more of that control over to the community instead of the team that you and I were on as we kind of built and advanced that product. So with the launch of the GTC and the token, we set out to decentralize a lot of the governance and decision making on the grants round specifically, and also see if we could spin up different work streams, and empower people to help kind of grow and further and advance Gitcoin's mission beyond just the core team that we had at the time.
Right. And so can you say more about the governance process that was launched? I know that there was a proof of an airdrop with a proof of knowledge and then a proof of distribution. How did that airdrop set up the conditions for GitcoinDAO at the start, and what did governance look like at the start?
Yeah, great question. So whenever we first launched, one of the things that we recognized is we identified that governance participation was really low. And at the time, we were trying to come up with ideas as to how to encourage more participation and how to make sure that these governance tokens, which were used to govern a thing and hopefully not to speculate on a thing, were actually used in that way. And one of the things that Gitcoin did is, you mentioned, yes, we had our airdrop where half of the total supply of the tokens went to those who helped us build and advance our mission to date. And the other half were kind of set aside in the treasury to help further our mission in the future. We'll talk about that half in just a sec. But as part of the the airdrop experience, we introduced delegation, where for those who were coming in to claim their airdrop, they either needed to self-delegate as part of that claim, or they needed to pick a steward. And stewards were somewhat new at the time. They're a bit more common now. We're incredibly thankful that ENS and Optimism and others have started to pick up kind of that steward approach and the delegate approach. But at the time, claiming your tokens and actually delegating to someone as part of that same kind of 1-2 click of the experience was novel. And I think it's one of the things that really helped us both identify who great stewards of our community would be. That's what brought Simona into our world. That's what brought Linda into our world. That's what brought Kris into our world, is them showing up as stewards and delegates here. But then also enabled our community to help make sure that their voice was being represented as part of their airdrop. So TLDR, airdrop launched. It had a great experience. Like, we invited people to the quadratic lands with us. They were able to claim their tokens. They could delegate to a steward. And then we worked with those stewards to make sure that we had a governance process kind of laid out and set up, that we had initiatives or work streams set up that we felt like would be great places to seed a lot of the growth of the DAO. And from then on, it's kind of been off to the races with our stewards helping lead and guide much of what the DAO does from now on.
Right. And just for the listeners out there, stewards is what GitcoinDAO calls delegates. And then work streams are kind of the fundamental organizational unit of the DAO and how work is getting done. And the quadratic lands is the token distribution experience that GitcoinDAO launched with, the quadratic lands being the mythical place that we're all going to go to if we're able to rewrite the rules of economic gravity with quadratic funding.
One of the best. I still love quadratic lands immensely. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully we can build out that lore over time. Linda, I want to kick it to you next. You are a Gitcoin investor. You've been a GitcoinDAO steward, and you were there from the start. Curious if you have anything to add about the DAO launch back in May of 2021.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how the launch went. I thought it was really well thought through. One of the problems in the past of DAOs is that there wasn't much voter participation. And so I love that at launch, there was 100% delegation when you had to claim the airdrop, which I think was a first from what I saw, or at least it was very early on. And I also love that because the airdrop went to past users who had supported and contributed to public goods, you already bootstrapped a very strong community that just had really good values. And I felt like the community was just almost filtered early on for people that cared about the long-term funding of public goods. And so it was just, for me, like a really thoughtful launch. And I see a lot of future DAOs replicating it, but you can just tell like early on that the energy was really positive and the delegates that came through really did care about the mission of the DAO. So just want to say thanks for that launch process.
Yeah, and it was really a lot of fun to have you, Linda, become involved in governance and reviewing proposals. Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a steward over the last year?
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning process through the last year. I think early on, there were a lot of decisions to be made in the DAO. And over time, we kind of started having more of the work towards the working groups. And so we spent more time approving budgets rather than like smaller decisions within the DAO, which while it's not necessarily my favorite part of like approving budgets on a regular basis, I do think that it makes more sense from an efficiency standpoint. But it's also been, I think, a learning process in that we're starting to have more open, transparent conversations. Where early on, like I would say that people were pretty generous about approving things and like kind of just learning the process of the DAO. And a lot of us like didn't even know each other necessarily. Like there were a ton of people brought together from this DAO like all over the world, and we're just starting to learn how to work with each other. And so over time, you start being more open to having these tough conversations around, hey, like, I don't necessarily think that this amount requested for this budget is maybe the best use of funds, especially relative to the DAO treasury. This might not necessarily be ideal. So like, let's have a conversation around what's actually needed here. And like, we kind of iterate from there. And so that's only kind of, in my opinion, been a more recent situation. Like early on, there was just more generous approvals. And so I'm really glad with how we're just, I think, growing up as a DAO, I would say. And I think we're becoming more sophisticated in metrics and having compensation structures and just kind of figuring things out. And I think Simona and everyone here has just done a really great job of pushing forward these conversations. So it's definitely over a year. Like, yeah, we've just grown up a lot.
Right. We're going to get into the scope of the governance rights that GTC imbues in the future, but one of the main ones, as you said, is approving budgets. And I know that that's been sort of up and down as the market is kicked around and as we figure out the essential intents of the DAO. I think it's a good opportunity to kick it over to Simona Pop at this point, who's doing DAO engagement strategy at GitcoinDAO now, but at first, I think started off as one of the top stewards in the DAO. So Simona, tell us about your entrance into GitcoinDAO and your impressions of how governance works there in the past, present, and future.
So I feel it was a natural step in my kind of work in Web3 to become one of the top stewards. My relationship with Gitcoin has has been going for, what is it now, 4 years. So we've had a long history. And I think it was only natural when the DAO started that I would become a steward and apply to become a steward and then become a steward. And a lot of people felt that they could trust me and delegated their tokens to me, that I appreciate every day, and hopefully I'm making the right decisions on their behalf. I think in terms of a little bit to what Linda said, the evolution of what governance looks like, particularly because GitcoinDAO was so early amongst the DAOs to play around with a lot of the delegation, a lot of the stewardship, a lot of the flows that really didn't and don't exist. for us to utilize or to shape or to indeed purpose or adopt for the uses of this DAO, you have to create them from scratch. And creating them from scratch is something that, as I always say, needs to come from a very, very mindful place where you are constantly in this dynamic of balance between attention and action. And the attention part, coming back to what both Kyle and Linda mentioned, is very, very difficult in this space. We are incredibly tight on attention. There is so much to focus on, particularly for people who have been in this ecosystem for a while. We have a lot of interests around the ecosystem because we all want to see it grow and evolve, because the tide lifts all ships. And I think it's important that, we keep that in our minds as we evolve things. But that balance between attention and action is something that in practice is actually pretty difficult to really get right. And having people participate in a meaningful way is something that needs to be addressed and coaxed and kind of enabled by very, very clear flows, which is, again, to what Linda was saying, I feel we've been starting to implement a lot since in the last, let's say, 6 months. And I think we've really seen that come through in the granularity of the decisions, in the attention to detail, in the conversations that we've been having, which have been one of my favorite parts of this whole process. Just the care that goes into those conversations and potentially those debates or I won't call them arguments because they are just debates around what is valuable, what should be something that we do now versus a little bit further down the line. And making sure that, again, we balance all of those things out in an engaged and meaningful way, and potentially creating standards that can help the entire DAO ecosystem move forward is something that is, I feel, a great responsibility for, and I feel is very important for us to continue evolving.
Right, absolutely. Kris, would love to kick it over to you and hear about your experience working on GitcoinDAO over the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, it's been an interesting experience. So I joined the DAO at the very beginning as a steward, and the DAO actually started on my birthday, so I'm never gonna forget that. So that was an epic moment. It was oh, I'm getting tokens.
Happy birthday!
Yeah, so it was a great start to see that Gitcoin went to the next level with starting the DAO. So I was very much into this. And then, very soon I joined as a contributor, working initially on community experience. It was still being we were still discovering what that exactly entailed. And I was still discovering how I could add value. And so the thing that came about very quickly was okay, we need a body somewhere between on the one hand, the stewards, where we can make decisions about okay, we have budgets that we have for these work streams, these units, these organizational units, and then just the contributors who are just coming with initiatives. We need another body where we bring the different work streams together and make decisions. So that became what is now, which is a mouthful, so CSDO. So this is the cross-stream DAO operations call. So we have a very tactical call once a week, and every 2 weeks we have a strategic call where we dive deeper. And so in these 2 calls, we make decisions as a team. So in these calls, there's 2 representatives per workstream. Most of the time it's the workstream lead or the workstream leads. And there we ratify a number of things that we do not want to bring to the stewards, or we communicate it to the stewards, but we have decisions to make on a daily basis. And so we bring these on this level, and then we communicate it to the stewards. So that's what we do in CSDO, and that evolved quite a bit. So first in the beginning, it was just a meeting, but then very soon there was this entire work stream that developed around it, and that is DAO operations. So because there's a lot of things that you can actually unify and that all the work streams need. So that's like, how do we tackle things like accounting, people operations, lots of things that we see that this is impacts cross DAO. So this became a work stream, and so this tactical meeting, the CSDO call, became something that was really very much at the heart of it. And then, yeah, it was really interesting to experiment with this and see like how can you actually take decisions as a team where nobody is the boss. Like before, it was easy. It was there's just Gitcoin Holdings, and there is Kevin Owaki, who is the CEO, and there is a COO, Kyle, and then it was always a very collaborative environment, it feels to me. But now suddenly it's like, okay, nobody is in charge, we all are. So we experimented with different ways of doing this. So the first format of the call was using integrative decision making. So that's like the holacratic way, where like you have a process of asking, making a proposal, and then you go through a round of getting reactions, and then integrating what the feedback is, and then passing proposals. So that is the first thing, and from that, so that's sociocracy, holacracy, we are now evolved to a format that is a nice template from the Ready that we often work with, and we call it an action meeting, and this is more an evolution into a format where we have more of a sort of stand-up meeting, and it's like, okay, I have this point, and this is the next steps that I need, and these are the outcomes that I want to get to. And most of the things we try to do async, because it has been mentioned before, both for the stewards as for the contributors, there's always this fight for like the available time. So we try to constantly optimize and get to a format that works for most of the people. That counts for both workstream leads and contributors as well as stewards. So that is that level that I've been focusing most on.
Great. So cross-stream DAO Ops is the body that is where workstream leads come together and make decisions with the context that they have. And it sounds like it started off as a holacracy, sort of consent-based decision making, and the legitimacy comes from the consent of the other people in the work streams. Anything else to add about CSDO, Kris?
Yeah, no, I think that kind of explains. We can go deeper into other parts of this, but it's definitely, it's a continuous evolution on figuring out what works. So it's like we always end with our checkout where the main question actually is like, how can we improve this call? Like the first one time I even asked, like, how can we improve it 10%? Because that's a goal. Like all these processes need to evolve the entire time. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, DAO governance has sort of been an iterative game, has been what I've seen. That might be a good segue into talking about seasons, which I think maybe Simona, you might be qualified to do. You want to tell us about how DAO governance, what it looked like when you came into it, and how you organized it into seasons when you came in?
Yes. So I think because we're talking about evolution, right, and we can go in the natural realm a little bit, which I know that we might do a little bit later. But obviously seasons just makes a lot of sense when you think about cadence. And to make sense of a landscape or to make sense of something, you want a particular pattern that you can recognize and you can move with. And so aligning the budgets for work streams with grants rounds just made a lot of sense in terms of that attention versus action dynamic that I mentioned earlier. Because if the attention is on Gitcoin for the grants rounds, then we would want to capture that attention and that action and have it apply to potentially other things that are DAO related or that are Gitcoin related. And so having this cadence that aligns with the grants just made complete sense in terms of creating that pattern of it's happening from here to here, this is the focus, and this is what we're doing. Here is a list of actions that we take. Here are the important dates. Here is when we make the decision. Here is how it flows. And everybody is aligned with that. I think the reason why that's very, very important is, again, you want to make sure that the energy that people put in is used to its maximum potential. Whereas before, if it doesn't have a semblance of a pattern or some sort of organization, it can very easily go in, a lot of it, but it isn't directed properly, and it can dissipate, and it can cause frustration for everybody involved. Because if I have to come back to a proposal, to proposals for 6 months, every single day, a different proposal, that might not be beneficial, because we are human beings. We have rhythms. We sometimes sleep. We sometimes do other things, which is okay. And so having that cadence ensures that we have that balance that I mentioned earlier, and it's important to have that and maintain it and evolve it so that we get even better at it. So that was the reasoning behind seasons, and aligning things that way.
All right. We just heard the reason behind the season.
Thanks,
Simona.
The reason behind the seasons. Yeah, what immediately makes me think of is like being both a steward and a contributor. That was personally very interesting to me, because then when you're on both sides, you see the amount of work indeed that stewards get with like these 3 monthly reviews of budgets, etc. And that's what I think everyone on this call has just like also seen. Like, we constantly got this feedback of like, okay, how can we make this better? And that's also what we're currently like evaluating, like how can we maybe morph the seasons into a longer period, or maybe do some other optimizations, because it is a lot. It takes a lot of people to actually really dive in. And we do realize this because we went through it ourselves.
And also just to come back to that point, and I know that, Linda, you had a tweet earlier, and it's so true. In the beginning, there used to be these votes that would literally be put up for like 3 days, and it would start on a Friday and finish on a Sunday at 12 a.m. And you go, give me just like a tiny break. And they're like, I really had an opinion, too late. So the point, when you start thinking about these things, and this is the big thing, this is why we need to do this mindfully, because you have to account for the fact that the technology is very powerful and it does many wonderful things, but it's still, people are still involved in it. You cannot remove the human element from thinking when you're thinking about patterns and flows and things that you put in place. You simply cannot. And it only creates frustration if you are not mindful of these, again, seasons in people's lives, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. It's important to account for those. It's important to bake those in. And yes, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Yes, sometimes a vote is up for way too long, 2 days too long, or here and there niggling delays, let's say. But they are there potentially for a reason. And when we evolve it, we must find out what that optimum window of voting is, and how do we do it, and when does it happen, and what are the steps before that, so that, again, it all flows and it doesn't frustrate anybody, or it doesn't stop anybody from genuinely making an informed decision and hopefully a valuable contribution, not just to Gitcoin, but again, to this ecosystem, and making sure that they are comfortable doing so, not rubber stamping things because you're running out of time because you have 30 minutes until a vote closes, right? Like all of those things, and being careful about how you align those things is very important if we want this stuff to genuinely become the thing that everybody replaces organizations with.
Right. Thanks, Simona. Yeah, I mean, I think that we can kind of look at the seasons, which every quarter there was a Gitcoin Grants round. Now there's a Gitcoin Grants round, and there's a GitcoinDAO governance budget review proposal. Those are the seasons. And if you look at this in an evolutionary perspective, we've kind of got, the DAO launched in May of 2020, 2021, and there's been about 4 quarters, going on 5 now, of evolution. You can almost think of the seasons as like a metronome. It's an iteration of doing, hypothesizing, doing, getting results, and then learning from there.
Immutable X is the layer 2 platform for crypto gaming. Immutable offers massive scalability with up to 9,000 transactions per second and instant transaction confirmation. No more gas fees, no more waiting around for your transaction to clear. Immutable's zero knowledge rollup finally unlocks the world of crypto gaming. Immutable X is the only gas-free NFT minting platform with over 26 million NFTs minted, all with zero gas fees. With the power of Immutable, gaming developers don't also need to become smart contract developers. They just need to plug in to Immutable's API and instantly start unlocking the full potential of crypto assets inside of games. This is why world-class companies and projects have decided to deploy on Immutable X, like GameStop, Ember Sword, Planet Quest, Illuvium, TikTok, and many more behind the scenes. So start building your game on Immutable X today at immutable.com. CoinShift is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses who need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage their treasury, and CoinShift offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the extremely secure Gnosis Safe. With CoinShift, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasuries to expressive, flexible, multi-chain features such as global user management, global contracts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization. CoinShift layers on powerful treasury management tools on top of the proven security of Gnosis Safe, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. CoinShift even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Messari, CoinShift is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. In DeFi, you have to keep up with the frontier, and CoinShift makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless.
I'd love to just kind of like open up the rest of the pod into a natural discussion between these 4 panelists of what was one problem that you observed or an opportunity that you observed, and what attempts have gone into solving that problem. And I can play host for the rest of the episode if we want, but I'm hoping that it can just be sort of a natural conversation between the 4 of us. So anyone want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think there was one that I appreciated how we've evolved since the early days, but early on you'd have these snapshot proposals and a lot of people just vote yes or no. And then there's not much commentary or guidance on why they made that decision. And so there's this lack of transparency to the person making that proposal and just other delegates / stewards on what's happening. So over time, I really appreciated people have been releasing voting guides on why they're voting for something or why they're voting against something. And so now there's more transparent discussion on what's going on. And I've tried to improve my process of now commenting on the proposals, hopefully early on before it even goes to the snapshot vote. But I think generally I'd love to, just for other DAOs, see more transparency on that. Optimism is really early on in the starting of their DAO. And there's a bunch of major delegates that I haven't seen, and they carry a large voting weight, and I just haven't seen any commentary on why they voted in a certain way. And so I'd love to see GitcoinDAO kind of influence these other DAOs to push for these voting guide type proposals.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that has evolved in really a good sense, and we'll continue to iterate on this. By adding some rules to it, we have, for example, the thing of a proposal cannot go to snapshot if not 5 stewards have commented. And then we refine that to saying if you are a steward, but you're also in the work stream, well, we're not really going to count your vote or your comment. So that's these little things that we've tweaked to make sure that that we get more input. So that's one thing. I think the Steward Council that we now have, which is a selection of the stewards where we can dive a little bit deeper, is also a positive evolution there that comes to mind. And I guess the third one that immediately comes to mind is the bear market. I really love it because suddenly the stewards have become some of the stewards have become way more really getting into big debates on why are we funding this. And I love it. It's fantastic. We should always have this, whether it's a bull or a bear market, having these very deep discussions. It's like, does it actually make sense that we fund this or not? And this actually led to deeper discussions within the work streams as well, within CSDO. And like, we really need to now fast track everything that has to do with what is the purpose of GitcoinDAO? What do we want to fund? What are our main goals that we want to achieve? So, and that's the thing that then became what we now call our purpose and essential intents. And so this is another tool that helps stewards to actually like evaluate, does it make sense to actually fund this? Is this really aligned with the mission and the values and the goals of Gitcoin? And yeah, I think there's lots of little steps that we're doing here that I love.
And I think it's very much around this theme of transparency and making sure. So this is one of my main goals, that everything that we do is as transparent as possible and also as objective as possible when we make decisions about things, which is why having clarity around the purpose and essential intents is important, which is why having clarity on what the engagement is around the stewards and the stewards that then become part of the steward council is there. Because again, to Linda's point, there are so many people in the various different DAOs out there that you have no way of knowing, are they present? Are they taking time to look through the proposals, to understand the impact of a budget request or some sort of funding request on the treasury of that particular DAO? Is there a process? What is the process? And so for me, having these things very, very clear, not just for the people within the DAO, but for the outside world, for the ecosystem, and potentially having it again as patterns that can be adopted and can be taken almost like again, open source containers for people to use to ensure that their decision-making process and their governance process is as transparent and hopefully as flowing as we're trying to make the Gitcoin one be. And I think ENS recently, well, I think in the past couple of months, they've actually forked the steward health cards that we have that tracks engagement and tracks engagement in the last 30 days, whereas before we had it all like lifetime. Now we're doing it in a way that you can actually see when somebody has dropped off, which are absolutely fine that they have. And if they have, again, things happen, your attention goes elsewhere, that's absolutely fine. But everybody delegating and everybody involved should know or should be able to see. And so I was really, really pleased to see them forking it and really focusing on, okay, this is a bit of tooling that actually is very, very important, particularly if we want to move towards a fluid governance model, right? Again, coming back to accounting for the fact that we are all humans and we want this to work, but also want to maybe sleep sometimes. So it's like, it's a very, very, I would say, a very nice and really kind of fast evolution, I would say. Like these things that we've put in place, again, in the last 6 months, or rather a little bit less even, since February when we started putting all of these things in place, I think has been really, really good.
Yeah, maybe mentioning the health cards, like that this is something, what it actually is. So we used to call it like the stewards report cards, but that sounded maybe a little bit too high schooly. So now it's like the health cards. And it gives like a score on like how well stewards are doing, in the sense of like it takes a number of elements into account, like how many times you have responded on the forum, how many times you have voted, how many votes you actually have delegated to yourself, etc. And it gives you this activity score that is a really good, gives a good representation of how active you are as a steward.
But actually, that's in the beginning, it used to just be the voting and I believe some sort of forum activity. And the reason why I really wanted us to evolve that is because there are so many stewards who are also contributors. There are so many stewards who are also part of some of the work streams. So we've started pulling some qualitative metrics, not just the voting how many times have you done it? Because that's so easy. Okay, I voted 10 times. Great. I'm super engaged. But coupling that with the comments, with participating in the work streams, with doing a lot of active engagement, like being on the calls, being on the steward calls, being on the steward council calls, and really having that a true finger on the engagement pulse has been very, very telling on a lot of those metrics, which is, again, wonderful to see.
I think one of the problems that we tried to solve, which you all have called out, is that whenever we launched the token, we had this awesome sort of claim and delegation experience, but a lot of those delegates over a year's time period, their interest has waned. They've gotten involved in other projects. They've been really focused on the merge. Like there's a number of things that have come up that have just pulled people away. And so building out those stewards report cards and setting them to the 30-day frequency have just been a really great way for us to evaluate like who's actually active in community so that folks can go through and redelegate. So we can make sure that those stewards are active in the community still, and those that are most active actually have the voice to kind of represent what they want to see inside of the protocol development, inside of the grants program itself as well. One of the other areas that really kind of stood out to me, I think, is mostly in like Workstream mandates. It's been interesting to kind of see how Workstreams have formed and sort of evolved over the year and then come back to like a core thesis, especially during this build market, as some folks have been saying, during this bear. I think that's one of the places where, we have very much appreciated more steward involvement and delegating to the stewards who are more active is to help align some of those incentives. But I think one of the things that's been great about this build market is it really has brought the DAO closer together. Whenever the DAO first launched, we sort of saw like this explosion of autonomy across work streams. And I think a lot of the DAO is starting to realize that like, oh, if we coordinate, if we work together, like we can get to a better collective outcome than like my work stream could on its own. And it's like, whoa, like that's not mind-blowing information here yet. But I think it's through some of the difficult conversations on, evaluation of like the purpose of the DAO and the essential intent, like Kris talked about, that like we've been able to really focus and kind of move more together as a DAO instead of in different directions as work streams. So I've appreciated that evolution over time, and stewards helping guide us to that outcome, and really just kind of getting closer and closer to that protocol state and launching, Gitcoin's protocols as well.
I was going to say I can add another one that I feel like we're working towards improving, but generally just compensation structures for delegates. It is a lot of work and it's a lot of time spent on this. And I definitely want people to be in a situation where they're not feeling that, just because the DAO is not paying them, they can't spend their attention on this, even though they really care about what the DAO is doing. And so we are moving towards, we've had discussions around, compensating at least the gas that people have spent on voting for these proposals, which I'm really appreciative of. I think that helps people because at one point gas was quite expensive. And then also just we've had like a Gitcoin payment towards, or a Gitcoin token payment towards the council. But I think that amount can definitely be reevaluated. But I would really like us to continue having that conversation around like how can we make sure people feel compensated for their time, since it has been a year of work from a lot of people, and many calls, many forum reviews and stuff like that.
Totally. And it's definitely something that is top of mind to work on. So we're actually, Simona and I were also just discussing on the entire thing of like, we have so many stewards also who applied. I think it's like 400 plus people, right? Who also said like, I want to be a steward, but that we want to like re-engage and like check in with them and see like, hey, would you have time? But then indeed, like there is a question of like, how do you incentivize them? The steward card, health cards is one, but there can also be like a financial component to it. But that needs to be like reasonable, of course, because we want people to really come because they believe in the mission. But at the same time, like how do you also take into account that we are still in a world where people need to just pay for their living, and if they spend a lot of time on this, like how can we justify this? So it is not an easy subject, but it's definitely very high on our list.
And it's a really interesting subject because like the level of compensation that we all voted on, I can't remember when it was, maybe it was March or end of March, beginning of April, at that point was good. And we chose the lowest tier out of the 3 tiers. And so it's such an interesting dynamic because obviously in our space, you have to account for that potential of a fluctuation if it exists, or to take into account, hey, when we started with the council, maybe we didn't envisage just how many hours it would be. And so I think, again, just rewarding with more governance rights is something that should happen, right? Because you are involved, you want to, and you are consistently involved, consistently engaged. And so it makes sense to get even more governance rights. But I think figuring out what a dynamic of or a combination could be that actually does incentivize people to give more of their time to this versus doing this in their free time and then trying to stretch something that can actually pay their bills. And this is, I would say, is a condition of our current state, right? Of our current status within this ecosystem, because we don't have a full protocol politician role, very well defined, and somebody that just is present in the governance of a lot of different DAOs, and they bring their expertise and their opinions and their valuable skills to each of those DAOs, and that is in itself incredibly valuable. So I think we'll see a lot of those models evolve, and I would love for Gitcoin to be a big part of that, because we're preparing for the end of the first Steward Council, and I want us to do a big retro and see, okay, what do we need to do better? What do we need to think about? What do we need to make sure that we have in mind for the next one? And even when we set it up, it was very much supposed to be, hey, let's see if this is something that works. And in my opinion, it really does, because it does help us have higher level discussions and potentially difficult discussions sometimes about the future of the DAO. And let's see how we evolve that to make it something that is sustainable and is something that is valuable for people and their time.
Totally. Thanks, Simona. At this point, I think it's my job as the timekeeper to note that we only have about 5 minutes left. So let's maybe get into final thoughts. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to tell us about GitcoinDAO governance? What are we shooting for? Do y'all have final thoughts about GitcoinDAO governance and its evolution before we break?
I actually have a question, like on the thing that Simona just said on like we are continuously getting this feedback. You being here, Linda, as like a steward and not a contributor for GitcoinDAO, because like Kyle, Simona, and I are also contributors. Like, what is like the biggest point of feedback that you would give to us right now? What is top of mind? Like, you should get better at this. Like, I'm really curious what comes to mind.
I mean, I definitely think you guys are doing a really great job. One thing is that for me, because I'm not day-to-day operating in these work streams, it's hard for me sometimes to understand the context of why things are being done, or this new project, of what the goal of this is. And so I actually feel like this is how I think about being a steward, but I actually don't think stewards should be reviewing everything. I really think that stewards should be focused on their interests and expertise. And so actually, I know we're moving towards this structure of getting paired up with other stewards based on like their interests and expertise to actually work with specific work streams. And so for me, I just feel very overwhelmed by a lot, because I'm not an expert on some of these topics, and I'm trying to my best to read through this proposal, and I'm like, I just have no idea if this is a reasonable amount for what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do, is that actually something that's necessary, or is it like a nice to have? And so I'm just feeling how can we like alleviate the amount of information that people have to process in a very limited amount of time. But otherwise, I do love that everyone's trying their best to give context. I just don't think it's practical that a steward knows every single topic.
Makes sense. That would have also been my final point. And like, what would I still communicate on what we can do better at DAO governance? It's communication, and it often comes down to communication and coordination. Just like how can we get better at actually like summarizing in a very concise thing, bringing the right information to the right people, and that's a challenge in a lot of like human coordination. And I think, yeah, we still have a lot we can do there. So thank you for that feedback.
And you know what helps? Creating standards and flows.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
All right, Kyle, we haven't heard from you. Any last thoughts?
I was just going to mention, we haven't talked too much about our governance forums, and those are a great place to get involved. I feel like anytime I listen to a podcast, I'm always super excited. I'm like, hey, this community seems great. Like, how do I get involved? So, typical plugs of Discord is a great place for us. Like, that's how we communicate day to day. But the governance forums are really the place to go through and kind of understand what's happening at either a proposal level, at a product level. There's usually updates that happen across the protocols there as well. So we definitely encourage folks just to check out the governance forums, because that's been a tool that has evolved over our year as well, in the way we structure it, in the way that we request proposals to be submitted, in the way that people show up and communicate there. But it's a great, like, it has all the details. Like, it's got all the things that you might need to know as to what's happening on Gitcoin. So, yeah, I think that's probably the only thing I would mention as like one last.
Nice. We'll have links to those resources in the show notes. I think gov.gitcoin.co is the governance forums, and you can go to GitcoinDAO.com, which has links to all the things, the governance forums, the Discord, things like that. Alrighty. Well, thanks so much for joining me to create this episode about Gitcoin DAO governance. I think that governance is definitely an unsolved problem, but this is a snapshot in time about how one project is doing it, and hopefully will be useful to our listeners out there who are studying DAO era governance, whether within Gitcoin or beyond. So thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate all of your contributions to Gitcoin DAO.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks. See you all.